Tonight we are sponsored by Freedom Yoga. We have Mrs. Toni Dussex. This is also sponsored by Active. Welcome to a conversation between intellectuals. Tonight's discussion we will be talking about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the effects that it has had on so many people in the world, in our lives, and also within us. PTSD is relatively a new term. First time I got a hold to it may have been about 15, 20 years ago. Now it's almost a common household name. Years ago, a lot of people didn't really know what was going on with them. We first seen this on the scene with our faithful soldiers and service in the military. Of all branches is when it kind of first stemmed and started to become a rise for me. And I noticed, just in the history of it, that it was primarily focused with the military officials, all the pain and trauma and hurt and war and thoughts of war that they have been through or that is impending or impeding on our lives. A lot of stuff goes on behind the scenes of war that we civilians do not know about. And so a lot of our soldiers, our dedicated soldiers, to not just our country but to countries around the world, have the effect of PTSD. Another addition to that is that we have noticed in years later in the studies of PTSD that common people, laymen, also have PTSD just from traumatic things that have happened into our lives. And so tonight we are here in Freedom Yoga, this wonderful, wonderful establishment with Miss Toni Dussex. I remember when I first was able to come in her energy maybe almost 2 years ago. And I remember when this was a thought in her head. And now to be here and see it in manifest. And she did this in honor of survivors of PTSD, military and household alike. And so I want you to welcome to our platform, Ms. Toni Dussex.
Thank you for
Ms.
having
Toni.
me.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Toni, if you would, first of all, I'm going to just kind of ask you, because I know you have did a lot of study on this. You've dedicated your entire business to the relief of PTSD. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you what your definition of PTSD and why you kind of got on this journey.
Okay. So PTSD is a pretty personal topic for me because I'm a PTSD survivor myself. I lost my first husband in 2003. He was murdered. And I truly, now that I know as much as I do about PTSD, I think that I had it already from past traumas before that even happened, and then it was worse, obviously. So I just kind of coasted and basically existed for years and was suicidal, had suicidal thoughts, was on all kinds of meds. I'd gone to multiple doctors, just tried to find anything to help, and I finally just got to the point where I decided I wanted to do something, try to find something that actually worked instead of just putting a Band-Aid over it keep going the way that I was. So started doing research, and about that time they had come out with some studies proving that yoga was effective for the treatment of PTSD. So I went through the whole training process to get certified to teach yoga, and then at that time the company that I trained through, Yoga Fit, had just come out with a program called Yoga Fit for Warriors. So that was yoga for PTSD and trauma. And it was originally created for the military, and then just like you said, they started realizing how many just regular everyday people needed it also. So I've been teaching trauma-sensitive yoga for, I guess, about 7 years now, 6 or 7 years.
Cool.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of benefits. I've gotten just an amazing amount of healing within my own life, and so that's why I'm passionate
From
about
yoga?
Yeah.
And you started doing yoga because you had PTSD, or was it because...
Well, I started doing yoga like before my husband was killed, and I really enjoyed it, but I didn't get into it. I wasn't really consistent with it. Okay. And then after that happened, so fast forward, this was 2009, I guess. So my husband was killed in 2003. 6 years later, I got back into yoga, and I've been with it ever since.
Ever since.
Yeah.
If you don't mind telling just the viewers that are watchers, we like to kind of be open here on Conversation with the
Sure.
Intellectuals. Only if you're comfortable, if you could tell us a little bit of the story that with your husband that led you to know that, hey, you needed yoga as an intervention, you had PTSD. If you'd mind sharing it with the viewers.
So
what happened?
I'm not super clear on your question. What?
Like, was it the death of your husband that catapulted you into yoga to know, hey, I have PTSD and this is going to help me get over it?
Well, so no, I was, after that happened, after I lost him, I was diagnosed with PTSD.
Okay.
And it was kind of, I don't remember if it was said to me or if I just, kind of took it as PTSD was one of those things that was just there to stay, like you couldn't heal from it, because that's the impression that a lot of people have, that once it's there it's not going anywhere, which you'll always be affected by it, but I don't even meet the criteria for PTSD anymore. So yeah, that was what was, I was to the point where I decided I could not take Xanax all day, every day anymore. I didn't want to be on antidepressants that kind of just made me feel numb.
Right.
So I didn't, I really wanted to truly heal instead of just mask the symptoms and things that I was experiencing.
Right. And yoga was your outlet for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Right on. And for post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is a mental health condition that is triggered by a terrifying event, such as a military combat, natural disasters, terroristic incidents, serious accidents, or physical or sexual assault in adult or childhood, either experiencing it or witnessing it. So that is the definition of PTSD. Mm-hmm. I have suffered PTSD, not diagnosed. No one has came to me and said, hey, you have PTSD. Because for me, with PTSD, I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to tell anybody. But when you do the research, okay, that's me. I have this symptom, this symptom, this symptom. I feel this way. And so I've had PTSD for a very, very long time, from traumatic incidents that have happened in my adulthood, in my childhood, in my early womanhood, in my middle womanhood. And so it's something I'm very familiar with. I often use outlets to kind of help me deal. Sometimes it's anger, sometimes it could be liquor, sometimes it could be, a number of things that I used to deal. And I am interested now in this part of my evolution where I want to kind of, like you say, not put a Band-Aid on it, but I kind of really need to deal with it. Yeah. Because what I've noticed about it is that it's like an open, festering sore.
Absolutely.
Okay? And after a while, it makes the soul stink. Yeah. And so it's something that I'm now in my later life trying to get a grasp on. So if I could say anything to someone that is just now happening to, it would be try to get something to deal with it early. We as a community, we tend to say, oh, she just got bad nerves, or oh, she's under stress a lot, or oh, she just acts like this when it happens, instead of really getting to exactly what's going on, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of times people don't like to say that out loud because it feels like defeat.
Right.
Like, oh, I don't know how to handle stress.
Well, there's a lot of stigma around it,
right,
too.
Right. It makes you feel like the weakest one in the room because
right.
Your grandmother went through the same thing you went through, but she ain't hollering PTSD, or your mama did, or your uncle, and etc. So a lot of times people will say, oh, y'all just new age, y'all got these new terms, all these alphabets for what's going on in your life, when it actually is a real live entity. Yeah. That even though we're addressing it now, it should have been addressed then. Even though we have a name for it now, and maybe not then, it's still the same beast and the same monster. And women, what I've noticed, which I deal with a lot of women often, we have PTSD. And normally PTSD is singular to just men. So could you tell us your experiences with PTSD and other women that you've seen have it, or have you experienced that often?
Yeah, absolutely. Women actually have a much higher rate of PTSD than men do. So if you just look into the fact that 1 in 3 women are sexually abused or assaulted at some point in their lives, that's a huge factor. And then there's all kinds of things that kind of play into, like you said, your grandmother can go through something and she might not have gotten PTSD, but you could. So there's a ton of different factors that play into it. Epigenetics is one. So descendants of Holocaust survivors, slaves, anybody who's been, their ancestors went through these horrible events, they're more likely to develop PTSD. Women are more likely to develop PTSD. Military is more likely to, military and first responders, because they're trained for combat,
right.
but they're not trained for peace at all. So they're, they're kind of programmed so that their nervous system can handle war, but then they're not taught ways of dealing with what that does to your mind and body after the fact. But for me as a woman, I've dealt with, what woman hasn't been sexually harassed or assaulted? Yeah. So I think it's probably far more than 1 in 3, but that's just the statistics.
Right.
But yeah, I work with women who've been sexually assaulted, abused, all walks basically, really, and that's what's interesting is it doesn't matter what not that it doesn't matter what the situation is, but you can have somebody who's survived sexual assault and somebody who's been in combat, and they're going to have pretty much the same symptoms, even though it was a different scenario. So intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, depression, anxiety, all those things. So when somebody comes in here, the cool thing about treating trauma with yoga is I don't have to know your story in order to help you, and I love that, because just like you said, I don't really want to talk about it, and there's things that I don't want to talk about either. And then there's also part of the science behind this is that when you have PTSD, different parts of your brain are activated, and it's hard. Linear thinking is hard. It's difficult. It's a lot of times hard to even tell that story, or impossible sometimes. So we can get into the body. What I do is considered a bottom-up approach, whereas like talk therapy is top-down. So I get into the body, and I don't really need to know a story.
Yeah. Because in that healing through yoga, the body will tell its own story, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. And it will release what it needs to. So.
Yeah. What is one of the greatest healing experiences you've experienced while doing yoga for people with PTSD?
For myself or for
just in
one
general,
of my students?
It could be yours, whatever.
Oh gosh.
Like one of the stories that stand out where
Well, just recently I had a veteran who sent me a text thanking me for what I do, and said, quote, "I've come a long way since January when I had a gun to my head."
Amen.
So yeah, it's stories like that
Amen.
let me know I'm doing good.
Right on. Doing the will. Doing the good will. So one of the statistics we have is of the estimated 683,000 women who are raped annually, 94% experience symptoms of PTSD. 1 in 4 girls are victim of some form of child abuse, sexual child abuse, just like you said.
And that's only what's reported.
And that's only what's reported. Right on. That's only what's reported. Some of the signs and symptoms are, as reiterating what Ms. Dussex said, are flashbacks, upsetting dreams or nightmares. I know for me personally, actually I just had a nightmare probably about 4 days ago. I still have the nightmares. Just when you think you've got a couple of moon cycles down and the sleeping is good, here it comes right back, So I still suffer from nightmares, severe emotional distress, or physical reactions to something that reminds you of a traumatic event. Sometimes I can be in a really good space. I could hear a sound, I could see a thing, I could smell a thing, I could hear a thing, and I'm right back.
Absolutely.
I'm right back. My heart is beating, I'm palpitating, I'm sweating, my energy has changed, and the people around you don't really know what the hell done went on. But inside of you, it's like all hell done broke loose.
Yeah.
And it could be from the smallest of things.
Right.
Last night I was looking at a cricket, and I know this sounds silly.
It's not going to sound silly.
But when I looked at the cricket, it brought back one of the worst memories of crickets that I had ever had in my life. It was traumatic. And I hadn't thought about that probably 35 years.
Yeah.
But I looked at that cricket, and that's going back to what I was telling you earlier about I'm getting to the point where the Band-Aid ain't gonna work.
Right.
Okay, this is a festering sore.
Yeah.
And the older I get, the wider and gaping it's getting.
Right.
To the point where 10 years ago I could have looked at a cricket and never even thought that.
Yeah.
Now I can look at a cricket and I'm right back there. So the longer that we go with the PTSD without handling it, the worse it becomes. It just festers into a huge monster.
Yeah. I tell my students, if we don't deal with our trauma will deal with us.
And that's for sure.
Yeah.
That is for sure.
And it will manifest as an illness, as a disease, and yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't just quiet down over the years. It does typically get worse.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of illness, the PTSD is a mental illness on its own, but we both know that the effects of trauma does actually cause physical illness. One of my sister friends always says, when the spirit is at dis-ease, it causes dis-ease.
Absolutely.
And so, when the spirit is at dis-ease, it causes dis-ease. Do you have any helpful tips for survivors of PTSD, how to cope day to day, even if they can't access you or access yoga? Do you have any tips for a PTSD survivor to get through from day to day?
Good question. Yes. First of all, there's a couple of books that I recommend. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk is one. And then In an Unspoken Voice by Peter Levine. Those two kind of changed the trauma treatment across the board and how we look at PTSD and trauma. And also, one thing that I would highly recommend for anybody who's trying to heal is to journal and start writing down your triggers. Like you said, your cricket. You know, that cricket, and trace it back to I tell my students the color blue, it can be anything, literally anything can trigger you, because what happens, if you think about it very simply, when we have a traumatic event, our brain registers every single detail that's happening around us. In order to keep us safe for the next time we see that cricket, then we don't have to think about it. We can run to safety, or we can hide, or we can do whatever we need to do to survive. And so it kind of bypasses your thinking brain. But our brain is, if we have the ability to regrow parts of our brain. So if you can identify your triggers and then start trying to establish a sense of peace and safety with all those things and kind of reassign their meaning, it takes a lot of work, and I know I'm probably making it sound a little bit more simple than it is, but I think that's a huge step, because when you can identify your triggers, then you can be a little bit more on top of it. Like for me, one of the most recent triggers that because I hadn't had to deal with it, but several years ago I was asked to speak something at the hospital, and I kind of envisioned the room that I knew what room I was going to be in. I'd been in there before and had no idea that there would be a podium with a microphone that I would speak, and I had no idea that was a trigger of mine. But the last time I was seated behind a podium with a microphone was at the trial for my husband's murder. And so I walked into that room thinking, okay, I'm just going to talk about yoga, no big deal. And then immediately started shaking and broke out in a sweat, and then couldn't catch my breath. And I literally had to get up and kind of start off using one of my tools to kind of demonstrate. I was like, okay, well, I'm having some anxiety, so we're just going to start with this. And I just kind of demonstrated how we go through that process. But breathing techniques are another huge thing, because when our nervous system is off balance, we don't breathe properly when we start out as babies. Orion, he takes these big belly breaths, I'm sure, when you watch him breathe.
He does.
He's not worried about holding anything in. He's breathing the way God designed him to breathe. But as we get older and we accumulate these stresses and we go through these traumas, we kind of get stuck in that holding pattern, just holding our breath. And so if you can learn to breathe and use all of your lungs, and especially if you have panic attacks, because people are going to tell you to take a deep breath when you have a panic attack, and I can teach all kinds of tricks for how to actually breathe through a panic attack. So that's super important to learn how to breathe. I will.
I need you to teach me that. And one of the body mechanisms that happen when, I know I do it, like when something's going on and I'm triggered or having a panic, I grab my chest like, oh Lord. And so that when you did that, I was like, I wanted this to the body saying, hey, we're not breathing. Because I always grab right here. You just like, oh.
Yeah.
Or you grab like this, you know.
And
then,
see, that noticing those little things is super important, I think.
Yeah.
Just what you just said. You realize that when you feel that way, you grab your chest, and so that's your body, yeah.
Yes. And I feel like I can't. It's like it's not enough air in the room.
Right.
Like you're sucking it all up.
So longer exhalation with a shorter inhalation. And if you focus more on your exhalation than your inhalation has to lengthen. It has to follow that. Simple, simple, simple. But it takes practice. But yeah, nobody ever thinks to tell you to exhale. You know what I mean?
Right.
Our inhalation is what activates our sympathetic nervous system, our fight, flight, or freeze.
Right.
Like, you get startled, and then you hold.
Yeah.
And then when you sink into your nice hot bath, you're like, you know? So that activates the parasympathetic. So when we exhale, especially the longer that exhalation, the more it starts to kind of soothe and calm you. So.
Look, I'm exhaling now. I'll start practicing that. So what you said was an automatic, if you do an automatic exhalation, if you do an exhalation, the inhalation will automatically be equivalent to that.
Yes, and in yoga we use what's called 3-part breath. So instead of that shallow chest breathing that we normally do, so notice that I want you to find the deepest part in your body, in your torso, where you feel your breath. Feel it in your belly?
Probably like in my stomach.
You do? That's pretty good. It may be the guava. The guava goddess. She's feeling the goddess.
That fire in my belly. It's the gods. I would say down here.
That's good. So that's really good because a lot of people can only breathe about to their sternum, especially if they have PTSD. So if you can breathe down into your belly, then you're doing pretty good. So you want to try to fill up the belly first, then the sternum, then the chest, and that's a full inhalation. Or you can think about exhaling from your belly, exhaling from your sternum, and then exhaling from your chest. You can count the length of your inhalation. So let's say you inhale to the count of 4. You would want to try to exhale to the count of 8, and that will balance your nervous system. Yeah.
So what do you think the trick is with breathing and conquering the whole PTSD thing? Do you think, like you said, it's just central nervous system balancing? Or?
Well, yeah. Well, that's part of it. But I think different things obviously work for different people too. There's a ton of different tools that I teach, and I kind of tell my classes, my students, that think of trauma sensitive yoga as like your Lowe's or Home Depot for your stress. It's your hardware store.
Okay.
And so you go pick out the tools that work for you, and the ones that don't, you leave them. It's fine. It's going to work for somebody else. It may not work for you. So there's lots of stuff. Okay. And I use different techniques too that are not necessarily lumped into yoga, but I use them in yoga. It's still mind-body techniques. So.
Okay. How would an individual know if they are being exposed or in the line or in the way for being a victim of post-traumatic stress syndrome? Like the precursors. How would someone identify the precursors enough to say, hey, something's got to change, I'm about to get a bad case of PTSD? Are those things present, or does it just jump on you like a bear?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I think that it's predictable and unpredictable. So like we talked about earlier, the epigenetics. So if your mother and your grandmother and so on have had traumatic experiences, which we all do, those things get passed down to some degree. And then it depends on, your social support, how supported you are. That's one of the big things that plays a factor in military. So look at our Vietnam veterans and how they were treated when they came home. Mm-hmm. They were spit on and called all kinds of horrible names. And our country, for the most part, I don't think was super supportive like we are now. We have parades when they come home, and they're welcomed, and things like that. So even though I still don't think we do that justice, but I think there's different factors. Your environment and who you're around and your support system and things like that, I think, play a huge part in it. I don't know that it's necessarily predictable, but there are definitely people who have a higher chance of getting it.
Right. And that could be
or suffering
environmental, genetics,
yeah.
or
People are marginalized, different cultures and different. So the LGBTQ community, they are at much higher risk than, a straight white female to get PTSD. You know what I mean?
Right.
So there's all sorts of factors that play into it.
Sorts of factors, yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you see PTSD going, let's say, in the next decade? Do you see it on the rise, especially with the way the world is going now, the level of trauma that's happening daily? Right now, California's on fire. They've shut the lights out. I'm sure that's post-traumatic stress disorder. Do you see a serious increase? And if so, then what avenues do you think we as a general consensus need to kind of put in place?
Oh, gosh. That's a real tough
big
question. That's a
question.
big question, sister. So you said something earlier about somebody said something that was new agey or something. So one okay, if you think about back in the days when we didn't have radio, we didn't have TV, we didn't have internet, we didn't have anything.
Right.
So people were a lot more sheltered. They only knew what was going on in their small little village or community or whatever.
Right.
Now we know everything. Mm-hmm. We have access to every single news story, and it's being thrown at us constantly, like it or not. I mean, so you can get on Facebook, and it doesn't matter how, like for me, I'm pretty tight with, I don't follow any news or anything like that on my Facebook. I try to keep my Facebook pretty peaceful, and it's just people that I know and things like that, but you'll still have somebody post something like somebody being abused or animals being killed or something like that. So these things are being popped up. They're being presented to us constantly.
Yes.
So we have a lot more exposure and a lot more we're just exposed to everything. We're stimulated constantly.
Yes.
And the mindfulness is kind of, I don't know if it's getting better or worse. I think that it's coming around because yoga and mindfulness and meditation have been around forever, it's kind of becoming popular, I guess you would say, but I think it's important. So I don't know. I think that our mental health care system in our country is horrible, so I hope that improves.
We need a serious revamp.
Something's got to give.
I've been praying about that.
Yeah.
Because mental illness is on the increase.
Yeah.
And our ability to help the mental ill is on the decrease. A serious decline.
Very much so.
And it can be perceived as violent, and people are getting killed, and it's mental illness. Mm-hmm. It's mental illness. The mental illness needs a serious revamp.
Yep.
A serious revamp. And I think places like yoga is a natural intervention for the revamping. Because a lot of times what I've experienced is just people just need to know they're safe.
Yeah.
That things are going to be okay, that the sun will come up tomorrow, and that night has went away.
And that there are others who are experiencing the same thing.
And that they're not alone.
Yeah.
Because it feels lonely.
Yeah, it does. And you feel, there's a lot of shame tied into PTSD also.
Absolutely.
And I want to add too that not just yoga, because you can be traumatized in a yoga class, believe it or not. I'm serious. Especially, so let me give you an example. Number one, if you'll notice, this is the back of our studio. So this is the wall that's to all of our students' backs. So you're facing that door when you come in this room. That's huge, especially for anybody with PTSD, because they can't sit comfortably with their back to a door. Somebody who's been a victim of any kind of sexual crime at all doesn't need to be touched by a stranger without permission, and that's pretty common in a lot of yoga studios for a yoga teacher to just walk up without permission and put hands on people and touch. So we don't do any of that. I think it's crucial that if you're wanting to deal with PTSD in a yoga setting, that you find a trauma sensitive yoga studio.
Okay.
Not just
Thank
any
you for
old.
saying that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
There's a huge difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a huge difference between yoga and yoga training sensitive.
Yes, trauma sensitive.
Trauma
yoga.
sensitive.
Yeah.
And you specialize in trauma
sensitive yoga.
Okay. Okay.
The windows, which right now the shades are closed, but there's a reason I wanted the windows up high so that there was no, we don't get any creepers peeping in during class and things like that. That you can get some natural sunlight without people staring at you when you may be in vulnerable or uncomfortable positions.
Okay.
There's a ton of different little things that are factored into this. It's very well thought out and planned.
Honey, the feng shui in here is amazing.
Thank you.
I can feel it. It's a beautiful, beautiful studio.
Thank you.
Some of the changes in physical and emotional reactions also, I want to talk a little bit about, because I would like to, if we can kind of talk about what it's like as a person to live with someone that has PTSD. A lot of times that person may be often perceived as a mean person, or someone that's not easy to get along with, or someone doesn't really accept love or affection.
Right.
What advice as a PTSD survivor and someone that is overcoming, and I heard you say you don't even fit the criteria anymore, what advice would you give a family member, a friend, or a loved one, or even someone at work? How do you deal with the person that has PTSD? How do you deal with them sensitive-wise?
Well, just like you said, be sensitive. And I would probably recommend that they kind of take a step back and make sure that they're being supportive and not making the problem worse. I've literally had veterans come to me who've had wives. Their wife has told them, you just need to get over it. You need to move on. So not saying things like that, because you know as well as I do that you can't move on. You can't. Right. You might can move on, but you can't get over. You can't get over life-changing events. Right. They shape who you are.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that they, it's going to negatively alter who you are for the rest of your life, but it definitely changes things. It changes the way the world looks, and it changes the way the world feels.
Yeah.
So support is crucial. Letting those people know that they're loved and how important they are, because they may be dealing with suicide. And that's another thing that people don't understand. Suicide is looked at as a selfish thing, which I'm not going to get into that, but I will say that a lot of people who have had suicidal thoughts are a lot of times under the impression that their loved ones would be better off or more healthy or happy without them, without having to deal with their stuff. And that's never been the case in my experience, ever. So those people are always valued and loved. They just don't feel it within themselves, because they feel isolated and lonely, no matter how their family may be trying to support them. It's just, and then find help them, and go to the help with them. Don't just say,
Right.
I love it when I have a couple coming in and one of them's struggling and the other one's like, I'm just gonna do it with them. I'm here with them. So just be there. Be a human.
Hold a hand. Be a human.
Be a human.
I know that's right, Toni. Be a human.
Be a human.
Be kind
it's
to
not
one
that
another.
hard.
It's
That's what we were made to be. Human.
It's not that hard. It's not that hard.
No.
Another thing that I've been seeing on the rise too, Toni, just not like anything I've read formally, but just having personal experiences, are the amount of children that are coming up with PTSD. Whether it's the trauma of what they seen their parents go through. A lot of the children these days, parents are missing. One's locked up, one's dead. A lot of things are going on in the home that you would not believe. Things are going on at school, the whole bullying movement that's going on. A lot of that causes PTSD. So I'm seeing a rise in children. And the thing with the children, when it's PTSD, we may see it as acting out or
ADD, ADHD, all those things.
How do we, as a general people, draw the line between, or be able to differentiate between it being a child with PTSD and just a rebellious child? Do you think those lines are kind of blended, or are we still able to see those separate?
Man, Man, you're laying on the tough questions.
It's
huh?
the guava.
It's okay. So first of all, I think this may not even be what you're looking for as the answer, but what stood out to me, what I feel like I need to say to that is we have to set the example. And if an adult, if parents cannot regulate themselves and their emotions and learn to not be so reactive to everything, whether it's PTSD or not, we cannot expect our children to know how to regulate themselves either. So I think that a vast majority of like behavioral problems and things like that are trauma. I think that it's just rooted in trauma.
I agree.
Resolved trauma.
Right. Or unrecognized.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with you on that. I recently had a niece come back into our presence. She's maybe about 5 or 6 years old. Well, she has been severely traumatized, and so when she came back around the family, they were like, "Oh, she's so quiet. She won't say nothing. Every time you talk to her, she rolling her eyes, or rolling her neck, or she don't want this." And so she was coming off like a kid that nobody want to fool with. And one of my brothers said, "Hey, let's say we got to back up. It's just she really have an attitude, or do we need to think about all that happened to her?
Yeah.
She's been taking care of people since she was 2. She ain't but 5 years old. She got 3 or 4 more other siblings. Come on now. Oh, is she really being that way? Does she need correcting, or do we need to figure out what we need to be corrected?" And so, that was kind of like a being light for the whole family. Not necessarily for me, but just for the whole village. Like, oh, okay, maybe this is trauma, maybe this is PTSD.
Yeah.
And so then I got because our talk and discussion was coming up. And you know how the universe do before you can even talk about something.
Oh, yeah.
It always lays it right in your
Yep.
face. And so I thought, this is PTSD. And I wonder how many other kids are they coming off like that kid when somebody needs to say, "What the hell has happened to you?"
Yeah.
And I think as humans, I think we don't talk to each other enough. We don't ask each other the deep questions. We don't ask each other the stuff where we might get the answer we don't want. Like, what happened to you? Is someone hurting you? Tell me about this day. How did that make you feel? I don't think we engage as humans enough. And I think because we don't engage in the spirit of humanity, then the soul and the spirit sets up what we know as PTSD. Because if we were able to engage or to say, today was a really bad day. My whole world fell apart today. This happened to me last night, or this morning that happened. I think just talking and communicating and getting it out would also be an alleviator to a lot of the PTSD.
Breaks the stigma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We don't talk, so the body starts to rot.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I think in our neck of the woods likes to just leave it to our faith, which our faith is huge, and I'm absolutely, my faith has gotten me a long way.
Right.
But at some point, we also have to be active.
Right.
We have to be active in our healing.
Right.
So we can't just sit and wait. Which, speaking of, one of my biggest pet peeves is the saying, "Time heals all wounds." Time doesn't heal shit.
Right.
So sitting and waiting is not doing anything.
Right.
It's not going to do anything. So we have to take responsibility for our own health.
Right.
And faith is wonderful. Faith is crucial in my opinion, but it's not
The be all end all.
right. So.
And in the words of John Lennon, which you said, "Time heals all wounds," the great John Lennon said, "And all heals time wounds."
All heals time wounds. I like that.
He's one of my heroes. I love John. But so interventions for coping with PTSD. We can learn coping strategies, get a hobby, sports, photography, etc. Invest your heart in yoga, like Dussex did. For me, it was poetry, writing, like she said, journal. Spending time with supportive and caring people. It is utterly important to have someone around you that loves you for you. Even in the midst of your pain, in the midst of your storm, your progress, your good days and your bad days, you gotta have somebody around you that loves you for you. And if you don't, because a lot of people find themselves alone, because PTSD can also make the person that's suffering from it isolate themselves.
Oh, yeah.
My biological father lives a life of total isolation. And I know it's because of things that he's went in his life. And I'm sure he has PTSD. Just the symptom alone indicates that's what he has. But he isolates himself. And a lot of PTSD people do. So if you're one that does isolate yourself, then get a support group. You don't have to know them. You don't have to engage with them personally. Just somewhere where you can go where everybody has a clean slate, nobody really knows each other, and they can share. So please do that. PTSD often results, unfortunately, a lot of times can result in suicide. I have been a victim of attempted suicide twice. I've tried it twice. I've been mentally institutionalized twice. My heart goes out to suicide victims and people, the family of people that committed suicide. I don't have a view like most people on suicide, and I won't get into that. But if you're having suicidal thoughts, reach out to a close friend or a loved one. Contact a minister, a spiritual leader, or someone in your faith community. And if you don't have anyone in your faith community, contact the person that you can share your favorite song with. Right. A lot of times therapy for me is the weirdest things I can get from people.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like seriously, like for real. Like me and my friend Vera, we don't have nothing in common but our love for flowers. Like seriously, we don't have a damn thing else in common. Okay? But we both love flowers. And just to talk with her, that's therapeutic for me. So find whatever is good to you. And if you don't have that many things that are good to you, the little few things you have, take them and use them and use them and use them, because goodness does not run out. It only multiplies. So hang on to your good things. Hang on to your good self. The National Suicide Prevention Hotline is 1-800-273-TALK. Again, 1-800-273-TALK. Please use that number. There are people there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Those people are trained, they're there to listen, and they can help. And you can be talked out of a situation. PTSD is not something that we have to die with. It's something that we have to live with. And we have to consistently overcome it and get to the next level, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think you can heal from it. Truly believe you can.
Okay, tell me more.
I mean, I think that, not to mislead or misunderstand, your triggers will always be triggers, but PTSD does not have to control you. You can get to a point where you can control your symptoms. You can control intrusive thoughts. You can control your breath. You can control how your body feels and what you're holding in your muscles and what you're not. You can find a degree of, and that's so empowering and it's so crucial. And that in itself is healing, because when we can establish a sense of safety in our body and a sense of control over our mind and our thoughts and just how we feel in general, that's huge for somebody with PTSD, because you feel like you have no control. You're out of control. You've lost control. You feel like your life has been completely shattered, and then nothing is right anymore. So if you can start gaining or regaining some control over some things, it's very empowering.
Yeah. Affirmation. Yep. Talk to yourself, believe in yourself, and know that. And you're right, you can overcome it. You can overcome it. Is there anything else that you would like for us to know about PTSD, your journey, your story? I know you have a very interesting story. I don't like to press people out of their story. I like for them to freely want to tell it. But I would love to hear it if you want to tell it.
Sure. Yeah. I'm comfortable telling my story.
Well, tell me now. I want to know.
I'll try to summarize.
Take your time, honey.
My first husband and I lived here in Longview, and he was the general manager at the Outback Steakhouse here, and was kind of in line to get his own store and become a proprietor somewhere. And the Texarkana store had become available, so he agreed to go and be the proprietor at that store. He started working there in June, I believe. of 2003. And then my son, so my son was about a year old at the time. We moved to Texarkana, and on the night of August 31st, he left to go to work, and it couldn't be more ironic of a story. It was Labor Day. He was on vacation. The restaurant was already closed, and two of his managers were doing inventory and needed some help, and so he decided to just go help them knock it out. He left the house at like 10:40 that night. My son and I were just, kind of hanging out at home, thinking he wasn't going to be gone long. And I, from about the time he left, knew I just had a horrible feeling, just this bad, terrible feeling. Anyway, my son, and I believe that my son did also, as a little child, a year old, was very, very upset, crying, inconsolable, couldn't get him to stop crying, which was pretty abnormal for him. So I called my husband. He answered the phone, and I asked him how much longer he was going to be, and he didn't really know. So I hung up, and at the time, we didn't have very much money at all. We only had one car seat, and so we kind of just switched out the car seat between our two vehicles. And so I called him again because I decided I wanted to just drive my son around the block, but the car seat was in his vehicle. So that time, when I started trying to call him back, I couldn't get a hold of him, which led to me calling, for a long time, over and over and over. And fast forward, two guys broke in or somehow got into the restaurant and murdered my husband and
Lord have mercy.
Two of his managers. And so
wow, those
two guys are in prison, and but
that is surely post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yes, absolutely. So
wow.
My son was 15 months old. I was 22 years old. Left a widow and a single mother completely, with no idea what I was going to do from then on, had all my hopes, all my dreams, all my plans for my future just gone in a blink. Yeah. So
How did you start healing yourself?
Well, it took a long time before I actually did anything. I was doing therapy. The first 2 or 3 therapists that I went to didn't do a whole lot of good, and that was actually before all this new research had come out. So I was doing talk therapy, which is the old school therapy, which is being proven or has been proven to not be effective for trauma. It's good for processing and things like that, but not trauma. Trauma has to work. You've got to start with the body with trauma. So it took a lot of years of me just living that way, and I really and truly thought that was like my death sentence. I thought that was going to be how it was, and constant thoughts of suicide and things like that, and was on medication for years. And like I said, and in my situation, so my son was 15 months old when that happened, and so he wasn't in school, so I was actually kind of allowed to be isolated, you know what I mean? Because I didn't have the responsibility of taking him to school every day and that kind of thing. So I look back on that, and in some ways I think that was a blessing, and in other ways I know that it delayed my healing because I just didn't do anything. I did nothing for myself. I did nothing to try to heal other than medication because I didn't know that there was anything else. So anyway, like I said, I was so just exhausted from that was 6 years of just feeling like absolute hell before I started just kind of, okay, there's got to be alternatives, there's got to be supplements, there's got to be something that I can do other than meds and just, praying that I die fast, So, and then I think I started with where I just left off. So
right on. And now look, we're in freedom.
I know. Look at
Lord
this.
Is good, man.
And that's truly. I think that's a huge. Oh, I know it is. Not. I think. being able to help other people is a continuous healing for me too. It cycles back around. So I love it. I love being able to use it for good.
Right on.
Instead of
Right on.
letting it destroy me.
Let it destroy you.
Yeah.
And that's the key to healing. That's right.
Yeah.
To help others to heal. And in that, you will inevitably heal yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you, Miss Toni Dussex, for the conversation.
Thank you.
I enjoyed you, my spirit sister. I love you.
Yes, I love you too.
And thank you for the guava. Again, thank you for tuning in. This is Conversation with Intellectuals Amongst Intellects. Thank you to Miss Toni Dussex of Freedom Yoga here in Longview, Texas. Y'all come out and check the spot out. The feng shui is amazing, and she has a great spirit along with a great story.
Thank you.
This has been presented by Active. Thank you to Active for putting this on. Remember, PTSD is not something that we have to, PTSD is not anything that we have to live with. We can overcome it. Sometimes in our life, trauma happens in the worst ways and on days that we never expected and in times that we never would have thought. And most times it leaves us damaged in ways that we didn't expect it or that we would have never thought. But there is a way out. 1 in every 3 women, according to the statistics, has PTSD. I'm sure it's higher. Think of it this way. Every time you look at the next person, consider that they too may have PTSD. And if we all handle each other like we've been traumatic, like something traumatic has happened, like there is a stress disorder, then we will learn to have more patience with each other, be kind to one another, to love one another, to listen to each other, and to be there for each other. It is the key to humanity. Humanity is all we have. Being a human is one of the best things on the face of the earth. Learn to love each other, listen to each other, help each other. PTSD can be a thing of the past. It is rising, but there are people like Toni Dussex and myself and Active and other people who have survived it, are living it, living witnesses to it. Take care of yourselves. Remember that somebody loves you, baby, and you know that it's me. Welcome to the takeover. Just when you thought it was over, thought we had been rolled over, oh no, it ain't over. Welcome to the takeover. Hoorah. Until next time. Where can we find you on social media? I'm sorry. Tell us where we can find you. Tell us all about Toni Dussex.
Facebook. Oh, thank you. Facebook, Freedom Yoga Longview. Yes. Freedom Yoga Longview. My website is freedomyogainc.com, and on Instagram, Freedom Yoga Inc.